There is a quiet kind of suffering that comes not from failure, but from force. You might know the feeling, that tightening in your chest when things refuse to move, no matter how hard you push. That silent panic when life doesn't unfold according to plan, when relationships drift, when careers stall, when progress feels like trying to sprint through water. And yet, everywhere we look, the message is loud and relentless. Hustle harder, manifest faster, take control. But what if control is the illusion? What if letting go is not giving up, but finally allowing life to breathe? This idea, unsettling and liberating all at once, is at the heart of Alan Watts' philosophy. A British philosopher with a voice like silk and a mind like a tuning fork for ancient wisdom, Watts spent his life exploring what it means to live well in a world that cannot be controlled. He spoke not of domination, but of dance, of aligning with the current instead of fighting upstream. And while his words flowed through the 1960s counterculture, their pulse beats louder than ever today, in an age of burnout and self-optimization. In one of his most quietly revolutionary teachings, Watts suggested that the more we try to force life, the more we strangle it. That the path to real fulfillment comes not from gripping tighter, but from loosening our fists. This is not passivity, it is presence. It is a trust so rare and strange in our world that it almost feels like rebellion. And yet, this rebellion is not new. The tension between control and surrender has been alive in us for centuries. Ancient Taoist sages spoke of Wu Wei, the art of non-doing, where the river carries the man instead of the man thrashing against the current. Buddhist monks practiced detachment not as an escape, but as a way to see clearly. Even in ancient Greece, Stoic philosophers understood that some things lie within our power, and most do not. So, what does it really mean to stop forcing life? How do we tell the difference between effort and strain? Where is the line between discipline and damage? In this video, we will explore how this idea has echoed across cultures and eras, from Eastern philosophy to modern psychology. We'll look at why our minds resist surrender, how society conditions us to chase rather than receive, and what shifts when we stop gripping so hard. Most importantly, we'll walk through the very human journey of learning to trust, not in outcomes, but in the unfolding itself. Because maybe life was never meant to be forced. Maybe it was always meant to be lived. To understand what Alan Watts meant when he said that forcing life gets in the way of living, we have to first define what it means to force life. In psychological terms, forcing life looks like compulsive control. It is the mental habit of micromanaging outcomes, of constantly projecting ourselves into the future, of trying to make things happen even when they no longer serve us. It is a life built on shoulds and musts, on timelines, checklists, and quiet desperation. At its core, forcing life is rooted in fear of failure, fear of being left behind, fear of surrendering to something we cannot name. It is the belief that unless we are in control, something terrible will happen. But this belief is not unique to the modern mind. It is ancient, and it has shaped civilizations. Let us travel back for a moment, to ancient China, to the banks of the Yangtze River, where the Taoist sages first spoke of Wu Wei. This concept, often translated as non-action or effortless action, is not about doing nothing. It is about doing the right thing at the right time, with the least resistance. A farmer does not tug on his crops to make them grow faster. He tills the soil, waters them, and then waits. He understands that life has its own rhythm, one that cannot be rushed without harm. In contrast, look to the early industrial age, when the West began measuring life by productivity and progress. The idea that time is money, that growth must be linear, that everything must be improved, optimized, scaled, this thinking shifted how we see the world. Suddenly, nature was no longer something to harmonize with. It was something to conquer. The mechanization of life gave birth to a culture of force, And though the machines have changed, from factory belts to smartphones, the mentality has not. We still believe that more is better, that faster is smarter, that ease is laziness. And yet, anxiety and burnout are higher than ever. Depression now often grows not from tragedy, but from chronic striving. Alan Watts was one of the few Western philosophers who called this out. He saw how the Western mind, driven by Judeo-Christian guilt, Cartesian dualism, and capitalist urgency, could not relax into the present moment. He contrasted this with the Eastern mind, which had for centuries practiced surrender, not as weakness, but as wisdom. In India, the Bhagavad Gita teaches the concept of karma yoga, to act without attachment to results. The warrior Arjuna is told to fight his battle, but not to cling to victory. In Buddhism, non-attachment is not apathy. It is clarity. You do the work, you speak your truth, you live your life, and then you let go of the outcome. This is not passivity. It is the deepest form of discipline. Ancient Sufi mystics, too, knew this. Rumi wrote of the reed flute, hollowed out and played by the breath of God. The more hollow it becomes, the more beautiful the music. To force life is to resist that breath, to try to play your own tune instead of letting life move through you. So why, despite all this wisdom, does forcing still dominate the modern psyche? Because we were trained to see surrender as failure. In a world built on competition, rest is rebellion. Vulnerability is weakness. Letting go is giving up. This conditioning begins early. Children are often praised for achievement, not joy. Adults are rewarded for busyness, not balance. Even spirituality is now sold as a lifestyle upgrade, another tool for control rather than connection. But there have always been moments, even in the harshest systems, where the deeper truth breaks through. Take the story of Emperor Marcus Aurelius, the great Stoic ruler of Rome. His journals, what we now call meditations, were filled with reminders to accept what he could not change. Despite being emperor of one of the most powerful empires in history, he knew that power was illusory. He wrote of surrender to nature, of aligning with fate, of finding peace not through conquest but through inner stillness. Or consider the Japanese aesthetic of wabi-sabi, the beauty of imperfection, impermanence, and incompleteness. It is the crack in the teacup, the asymmetry in the garden, the pause in a piece of music. It is the opposite of force. It is the celebration of what simply is. And yet, this idea of not forcing is not only ancient, it is also personal. You have likely felt its truth in small moments. The love that came when you stopped looking. The idea that surfaced only after you walked away. The solution that appeared in the stillness, not the struggle. This is not magic. It is alignment. It is what happens when you stop pushing against the current of life and start moving with it. Over time, the world has swung like a pendulum between the poles of control and surrender. The Enlightenment brought logic and order. Romanticism pushed back with feeling and flow. The 20th century brought rapid industrialization and the birth of the self-help industry, yet also a renewed interest in mindfulness, therapy, and inner work. Now, in the 21st century, we stand again at a crossroads. Never before have we had so many tools for self-improvement, and yet never before have we been so exhausted by the chase. We meditate with one eye on the clock. We journal for productivity. We breathe deeply, but only so we can return to the fight. The wisdom of Alan Watts is a reminder that life is not something to be wrestled into submission. It is something to be trusted, even when it doesn't make sense, even when it hurts, especially then, because letting go is not a singular moment, it is a lifelong practice. And across history, the people who have known the deepest peace were not the ones who forced life into a box, but the ones who learned how to dance with it. If history has taught us that the art of non-forcing is as old as civilization itself, modern psychology has revealed just how deeply this need for control is wired into the human mind. To stop forcing life is not only a spiritual act, it is a neurological one. And for many of us, it begins with unlearning the stories our brains have been trained to believe. At the heart of this conversation is the concept of control, the psychological sense that we are in charge of our circumstances. In moderation, a sense of control is healthy. It gives us agency. It helps us take responsibility. But when it becomes excessive or rigid, control turns into compulsion. And that's when it becomes a trap. Cognitive psychologists refer to this as the illusion of control, the tendency to overestimate our influence over external events. It is the gambler who believes he can will a win. The perfectionist who believes every detail must be flawless or everything will fall apart. The anxious mind rehearsing conversations, trying to prevent every possible rejection or mistake. And underneath all of it, fear. A deep, often unconscious fear that if we are not constantly managing, adjusting, planning, and fixing, life will collapse. But life is not a machine. It does not obey commands. It moves more like weather, like waves, like seasons. And the more we try to freeze it in place, the more we suffer. This is where acceptance and commitment therapy, ACT, offers a powerful insight. Instead of trying to control or eliminate difficult thoughts and feelings, ACT teaches us to make space for them, to observe them without resistance, to take meaningful action not based on how we feel, but on what we value. In other words, to live aligned with purpose, even when the mind is chaotic. It echoes ancient wisdom. In Buddhism, this would be called mindfulness. In Stoicism, apatheia, not apathy, but a cultivated peace that comes from distinguishing between what we can control and what we cannot. In Jungian psychology, this is the journey of individuation, the lifelong process of integrating all parts of the self, including the parts that resist and rebel. Carl Jung once said, "What you resist not only persists, but will grow in size." He knew that the more we fight the unconscious, the more power it gains. Forcing life in this light is an act of resistance, and resistance builds tension. Eventually, that tension becomes suffering. On a social level, we see this play out in relationships. When we try to control how others see us, we become performative. When we try to force others to behave the way we want, we become manipulative. Love becomes transaction. Connection becomes strategy. And over time, we find ourselves isolated, even when surrounded. In workplaces, the culture of forcing shows up as toxic productivity, the relentless pressure to always be achieving, growing, outperforming. It leads to burnout, disengagement, and a loss of meaning. People become tools. Time becomes currency. Rest becomes guilt. Yet, even in these systems, there are cracks of awakening. Burnout research, pioneered by psychologist Christina Maslach, shows that true well-being in work is not about output, but about alignment, feeling valued, having control over our environment, being part of a supportive community. In short, it is about surrendering the false narrative that effort alone defines our worth. The neuroscience of surrender is also compelling. Studies of flow states, those moments of total immersion and ease, reveal that the brain actually becomes more efficient when it stops trying so hard. The prefrontal cortex, the part of the brain responsible for self-monitoring and control, quiets down during flow. This allows other regions associated with creativity, intuition, and pattern recognition to take over. You do not have to meditate on a mountain to feel this. You've likely experienced it while painting, running, cooking, laughing, any time when you forgot yourself and life moved through you. That is the absence of force. That is what Alan Watts called the music of life. Not a task to complete, but a song to be played. And yet, the pull of control is strong because it is comforting. Chaos is frightening. Uncertainty is uncomfortable. And so the mind clings, often in the name of responsibility, safety, or success. But there is a psychological cost to this clinging. Chronic forcing activates the sympathetic nervous system, the fight-or-flight response. The body floods with cortisol. The heart races. The muscles tighten. Over time, this becomes a baseline state. We live on edge, even in silence. Peace becomes unfamiliar. Stillness becomes threatening. This is where somatic psychology offers another bridge. It teaches us that surrender is not just a thought, it is a physical experience. The body must feel safe enough to let go. That is why trauma survivors often struggle with relaxation. It is not because they are lazy or unwilling. It is because, for them, letting go feels dangerous. To stop forcing life, then, is not merely a mindset shift. It is a healing journey. It requires tending to the nervous system, creating safety, building trust, first within ourselves, then with others, then with life itself. This is not easy work, but it is real. It is slow, and it is worth it. Jung spoke of the shadow, the repressed parts of ourselves we do not want to face. For many, the need to control is a shadow trait. It often masks deep insecurity, childhood patterns, or the pain of unpredictability. When we force life, we are often trying to force back a part of ourselves we are afraid to meet. But when we bring awareness to this, something shifts. We begin to see the impulse without becoming it. We notice when we are grasping. We breathe through it. We soften. And slowly we find something deeper than control. Trust. Trust is not blind optimism. It is not giving up. It is choosing to participate fully in life without needing to dominate it. It is what Alan Watts called the wisdom of insecurity, the understanding that life is inherently uncertain, and that is precisely what makes it alive. When we stop forcing, we begin to feel again. Not just joy, but grief. Not just love, but loss. The full spectrum of being. And in that aliveness, something sacred returns. Because we are not here to win life. We are here to experience it. There is a peculiar story told in parts of rural India about how villagers would catch monkeys. They would hollow out a coconut, leaving a small hole just big enough for a monkey's hand. Inside the hollow, they placed something shiny, a coin or a sweet. The monkey, curious, would reach in and grab it, but the hole was too narrow for the monkey to withdraw its clenched fist. If it let go, it could be free. But most didn't. They stayed trapped by their own grip. We like to think of ourselves as wiser than that, but how many of us are still holding on to something, an idea, a relationship, a dream from 10 years ago, that has long stopped serving us? How many of us are trapped not by circumstance but by the refusal to let go? That is the paradox of effort. The more we clench, the more stuck we feel. The more we push, the more life resists. The more we chase, the more it slips away. And still, we try harder. Because letting go feels like giving up, like failure, like weakness. But it is none of those things. Letting go is an art, a mature, sacred, often uncomfortable one. And it begins not with grand gestures, but with micro-moments of truth. The moment you realize the person you are trying to fix does not want to be fixed. The moment you understand that your body is not a problem to solve. The moment you stop apologizing for being tired, sensitive, or slow. These are not breakdowns. They are breakthroughs. In modern Western society, we often praise hustle. We reward the ones who push through pain, burn the candle at both ends, wear exhaustion like a badge of honor. But when you look closer, you start to see the cost. Anxiety masked as ambition. Burnout dressed as productivity. A deep existential ache, softened only by distraction. But ancient cultures knew better. In Taoism, there is a word, Wu Wei, that loosely translates to effortless action. It does not mean laziness or inaction. It means moving in harmony with life, not against it. Like a river bending around rocks, not smashing through them. Like a dancer responding to the music, not overpowering it. In Zen, monks practice sitting still for hours, not to escape the world, but to return to it. Stillness reveals the mind's games. It shows us the truth behind the noise. And in that quiet, something wiser begins to emerge. Even in Christianity there is a whisper of this surrender. Be still and know. Not strive and fix, but be still. And stillness is terrifying for a mind that survives by control. Because when we stop doing, we are forced to confront what we are being. And sometimes we do not like what we find there. So we avoid the pause. We fill our lives with plans, obligations, scrolls, goals, because as long as we are busy, we do not have to feel. We do not have to ask the real questions. What if I am trying to become someone I never needed to be? What if the life I am building is not mine? What if the voice I keep silencing is right? These are not gentle questions. They shake the walls we built around our identity, but they are necessary. Because the life we are trying to force may be the very thing holding us back from the life trying to find us. Letting go is not just a spiritual act. It is a psychological necessity. Neuroscience shows us that constant stress narrows our focus, depletes creativity, and disconnects us from empathy. The more we grip, the more tunnel-visioned we become. We miss opportunities. We alienate others. We lose ourselves. But when we soften, even a little, our brain enters a different mode. The parasympathetic nervous system activates. Our breath deepens. Insight returns. We begin to notice things. The softness in someone's eyes. The beauty in imperfection. The chance hiding in what we once feared. This is not abstract. It is observable, real, life-changing. There is a story from the Stoic philosopher Epictetus. A student once asked how to stop suffering. Epictetus replied, "Stop wishing things to be as you would have them. Wish them to be as they are." That sounds harsh at first, but it is a kind of mercy. Because as long as we resist reality, we are at war with the present moment. And the present moment is the only place life actually happens. Letting go, then, is not resignation. It is alignment. Not giving up, but giving in to something larger than our ego's small agenda. In therapy, this often looks like acceptance. The ability to sit with what is uncomfortable without immediately trying to fix it. In trauma recovery, it looks like titration, allowing just enough emotion at a time to feel safe, without becoming overwhelmed. In grief, it looks like tears finally allowed to fall after weeks of forced cheerfulness. Letting go can sound poetic, but it is often messy, raw, and nonlinear. One day, you feel free. The next, you are knee-deep in fear again. That is normal. That is human. The point is not to arrive at peace, but to return to it again and again, until returning becomes the habit. And slowly, the world begins to feel different. Not because it changed, but because your relationship to it did. You stop chasing the wrong people because you no longer fear being alone. You stop performing because you are no longer ashamed of being seen. You stop clinging because you finally believe that what is meant for you will not need to be forced. And in that trust, something beautiful happens. You become softer and stronger. You become quieter and wiser. You become slower and more impactful. Because now, your actions come from alignment, not anxiety. From love, not lack. From presence, not panic. And that is what it means to live, not just survive. Not a perfect life, but a whole one. When we live in a constant state of forcing, of pushing, planning, clenching, we begin to lose touch with something essential. Not just peace, not just joy, but our very selves. The impact of a forced life is often subtle at first. It creeps in through sleepless nights and anxious thoughts, through the sinking dread that follows even the smallest failure, through the feeling that no matter how much we do, it is never enough. Over time, this becomes a way of being. Our nervous system adapts. Our self-worth attaches to performance, and what once felt like effort becomes identity. This has real consequences. Let's begin with the emotional cost. Forcing life builds a persona that is always in control. But behind that mask lives someone tired, someone afraid to stop, because stopping would mean confronting what has been pushed aside. Grief, anger, fear, longing, these feelings do not disappear just because we override them. They go underground, and there, in the shadows, they become heavier. Emotionally, we start to feel numb, not because we are heartless, but because we are overloaded. We lose access to spontaneity, playfulness, awe, the small joys that make life worth living. When life becomes a checklist, even happiness feels like a task to complete. Relationships begin to suffer too. When we force life, we often try to force people. We script their roles in our minds, what they should say, how they should behave, who they should be. And when they deviate, we feel betrayed. Not because they harmed us, but because they refuse to fit the narrative we wrote for them. Control blocks intimacy. Vulnerability is risky when you are trying to manage every outcome. So we withhold, or we manipulate. We show only the parts of ourselves we think are lovable. Over time, this erodes trust. In our effort to protect ourselves, we end up lonely, surrounded, perhaps, but unseen. Careers can suffer in a different way. On the outside, forcing often looks like success, promotions, praise, progress. But inside, many people chasing these things feel hollow. The goalpost keeps moving. The spark fades. Burnout sets in, not from laziness, but from living out of alignment for too long. One of the most damaging myths we inherit is that our worth is tied to productivity, that slowing down is falling behind, that rest must be earned. But the human spirit is not a machine. It does not thrive under constant pressure. It needs cycles, stillness, meaning. When we ignore this, the body keeps score. Chronic stress becomes inflammation. Tension becomes pain. The immune system weakens. The heart suffers. There is growing research connecting burnout to physical illness, not just through stress hormones, but through the emotional repression that often accompanies forced living. The body knows when we are betraying ourselves. And this is not just personal. There is a cultural cost as well. We have created a society that rewards the performance of control. We applaud those who grind, who hustle, who never stop, but we rarely ask at what cost. Mental health crises are on the rise. Anxiety and depression are no longer anomalies. They are common conditions of modern life. Our institutions mirror this. Schools push children to achieve before they've learned to feel. Workplaces celebrate efficiency over empathy. Even spiritual spaces can become another arena for perfectionism, where growth is measured, tracked, posted. In this climate, surrender feels radical. But the consequences of not surrendering are more radical still. Without surrender, we lose access to intuition. We stop listening to our gut, our body, our deeper knowing. We make decisions from fear rather than trust. We choose what is safe, not what is right. And over time, we wake up to a life that looks good on paper but feels empty inside. This was a recurring theme in ancient stories. In Greek mythology, there is the tale of King Sisyphus, condemned to push a boulder up a hill for eternity, only to watch it roll back down each time. His punishment was not pain, but meaningless struggle. He is the eternal symbol of the human who forces without flow, who strives without surrender. In Hindu mythology, there is the story of Arjuna in the Bhagavad Gita, frozen on the battlefield, unsure of whether to fight. Krishna tells him that action without attachment is the path, that forcing life through fear leads to confusion, but acting from love, from truth, even when it is hard, that is freedom. In each of these stories, the lesson is the same. When we live from force, we lose our place in the larger rhythm. We become disconnected from the world and from ourselves. And yet, there is always another path. You have probably felt it, even if only for a moment. The peace that comes when you finally let go of a toxic job or relationship. The clarity that arrives when you stop chasing someone else's dream. the relief of realizing that you do not have to prove yourself to belong. These moments are not breakdowns. They are breakthroughs, not signs of failure, but invitations to come home to yourself. But here's the hard part. Letting go can feel like falling. It can feel like weakness, like irresponsibility, especially in a world that equates surrender with defeat. But look more closely. A tree surrenders its leaves each autumn, not because it is dying, but because it trusts in spring. A river surrenders to gravity, not to give up, but to move forward. A child surrenders to sleep, not in failure, but in restoration. Surrender is not the end of effort. It is the end of forcing. When we begin to live from this place, everything changes. We stop trying to control how others see us and begin to express who we truly are. We stop chasing love and start becoming someone who can receive it. We stop fearing failure and start learning from it. And slowly, life starts to meet us. Not because we forced it, but because we finally got out of the way. So, how do we actually stop forcing life? What does that look like in the day-to-day, when the bills still need paying, the deadlines still loom, and the world does not stop just because we are learning to let go? This is not about abandoning effort or responsibility. It is about shifting the energy behind them, moving from force to flow, from control to collaboration, with life, with others, with the deeper intelligence within us. It begins with a simple but powerful shift: awareness. Most of us live in a state of unconscious tension. Shoulders tight, jaw clenched, thoughts racing. The first step in releasing that grip is noticing it. This can be as simple as pausing during the day and asking, "Am I forcing something right now?" That question alone begins to dissolve the spell. It brings choice back into the moment. From here, we move into practice. Not theory, not perfection, but gentle, repeatable practice. Like water shaping stone, these small acts of surrender accumulate into something life-changing. 1. Body-based awareness, somatic grounding. Before we can trust life, we must learn to feel safe in our own bodies. Start small. Throughout the day, take 5-second check-ins. Notice your breath. Is it shallow? Tight? Drop your attention into your feet. Feel them on the floor. Unclench your hands, your stomach, your shoulders. This is not about achieving perfect stillness. It is about returning to your body again and again. Every time you do, you loosen the grip of control. 2. Reframing control. Cognitive behavioral tools. When you catch yourself over-planning, obsessing, or catastrophizing, try this. Write down the situation you are trying to control. List what is in your control and what is not. For each item not in your control, write, "I release this." This is a simple CBT-based exercise that trains the brain to focus energy where it is useful. Over time, it builds discernment, the foundation of emotional maturity. 3. Values-based living, acceptance, and commitment therapy. Instead of chasing outcomes, focus on values. Not, did I win, but did I act in alignment with what matters to me? For example, if honesty is a value, success means speaking truthfully, not being liked. If growth is a value, success means learning, not avoiding failure. This reorients your compass. You stop forcing life to give you what you want and start giving life who you are. 4. The pause, mindfulness practice. Alan Watts often spoke of life as music, reminding us that the beauty of music is not just in the notes, but in the spaces between them. Create pauses in your day, micro moments of silence, a breath before speaking, a walk without your phone, a moment of stillness before reacting. These are not empty gaps. They are sacred openings where intuition lives. 5. Journaling for surrender. Try this evening ritual. Write down 3 things you tried to control today. Write how it felt. Then write, What would it feel like to let this go? This is not forced positivity. It is an invitation to reflect, to see the cost of forcing, and the possibility of release. 6. Inner dialogue, parts work. Often, the part of us that forces life is not cruel, it is scared. It learned long ago that controlling was safer than feeling helpless. You can speak to this part with compassion. I see you trying so hard. I know you're afraid. Thank you for trying to protect me. You do not have to carry this alone anymore. This gentle inner dialogue, rooted in internal family systems therapy, can be profoundly healing. It transforms inner resistance into inner alliance. 7. Rituals of trust, spiritual or symbolic acts. In many ancient traditions, rituals helped people move from control to connection. You can create your own. Light a candle each morning and say, I choose to meet the day, not master it. Write a letter to life expressing what you are letting go of. Bury something symbolic, a note, a worry, as a way of releasing it to the earth. These acts may seem small, but they speak to the unconscious, and the unconscious listens in symbols, not strategies. 8. Community and conversations. Talk to people who understand this path. Not just therapists, but friends, mentors, elders, people who have learned to live with less force and more trust. We are not meant to navigate this alone. We learn surrender in relationship, with others, with the world, with ourselves. Community reminds us that softening is not weakness. It is strength shared. 9. Boundaries as surrender. It may sound contradictory, but strong boundaries are an act of surrender. You are not trying to change others. You are simply choosing how you will participate. Instead of forcing others to respect you, you respect yourself. You leave when needed. You say no when it matters. You stop proving, pleasing, fixing. In that clarity, life becomes simpler, and often kinder. 10. Embrace the unknown, existential maturity. At the deepest level, surrender means learning to live in the unknown without panic. This is existential work. It asks us to sit in questions we cannot answer, to love people we might lose, to create without guarantees. It is not easy, but it is real. And strangely, when we stop trying to outsmart life, life begins to feel like an ally again. This is not about becoming passive or going with the flow in some vague spiritual bypass. It is about becoming deeply present, deeply conscious, and deeply committed to what is true, not just what is comfortable. And sometimes truth will still require effort, courage, action. But the difference is this. Effort born from clarity feels like momentum. Effort born from fear feels like pressure. Watts once described the difference between swimming and flailing. Both involve movement, but only one is in harmony with the water. When you stop forcing life, you learn how to swim again. Not to conquer the waves, but to be moved by them, to ride their rhythm, to trust their return. And that is what this path is. Not the end of striving, but the beginning of aligned movement. One breath, one step, one moment at a time. At some point, every soul reaches a quiet crossroad, not with fanfare or crisis, but in the hush between achievements. The pause after the rush. A moment where the question becomes too loud to ignore. What if I stopped trying so hard? Not to quit life, but to stop wrestling it. This is where the journey truly begins, not with striving, but with softening. Not by conquering life, but by finally letting it meet you as you are. What Alan Watts taught us is not to abandon responsibility, or to become passive passengers in our own story. What he offered was something more courageous. The idea that life unfolds best not through the clenched fists of control, but through the open hands of trust. The truth is, surrender does not mean we stop shaping our future. It means we stop punishing ourselves for not knowing how it will all turn out. It means showing up each day with presence instead of perfectionism. Letting go of outcomes and falling in love with process. Choosing inner peace over outer validation. Choosing depth over noise, meaning over metrics. And it also means accepting the cyclical nature of being human. There will be seasons of striving, of pushing, of making things happen. But even then, something changes when we know we are not the sole architect of our lives, that there is a current deeper than us, that sometimes the best thing we can do is stop paddling and let ourselves be carried. Because here's the paradox. The less we force, the more life opens. Not always immediately, not always the way we imagined. But something shifts. That person we thought we had to chase, they drift away, and someone more aligned shows up in silence. That opportunity we were clinging to, it closes and creates space for something more meaningful to emerge. That identity we spent years constructing, it softens, and in its place, a truer self begins to bloom. When we stop forcing, we return. Not to who we were, but to who we always were underneath all the striving. The child who danced without reason, the teenager who dreamed without apology, the adult who still aches for something real. This is not regression. It is remembering. Remembering that we are not machines. That rest is not laziness. That stillness is not emptiness. That surrender is not failure. It is the art of living. History reminds us that this art has always existed. In the Taoist sages who spoke of water's wisdom, in the Sufi mystics who whirled themselves into presence, in the words of poets like Rilke and Rumi and Mary Oliver, who all told us in their own way to let life touch us instead of trying to manage it. And psychology confirms it. The nervous system, when not constantly pushed, heals. The mind, when allowed to rest, reveals its creativity. The heart, when no longer armored, begins to feel again. So now the question returns to you. What would happen if you stopped forcing? Not all at once, not with dramatic declarations, but gently, today, in this moment. What would it feel like to breathe without the weight of becoming someone? To act from inspiration instead of obligation? To rest without guilt? To love without needing it to be perfect? These are not just spiritual questions. They are human ones, and every time we ask them, something ancient in us remembers. There is another way, a slower way, a kinder way, a deeper way. And the truth is, this way has always been waiting for us. Not in the future, not in some distant goal, but right here, right now, in this breath. So, if this spoke to something in you, some tired part, some buried knowing, then maybe you are already on the path of less forcing, more listening, less proving, more being, less controlling, more trusting. This channel is not about quick fixes or surface-level motivation. It is a space for something deeper. For those of us who are tired of running in circles, for those who want to understand themselves and life with more honesty, more compassion, and more courage. We explore what it means to reclaim our power, not the loud, aggressive kind, but the quiet strength that comes from knowing yourself, setting boundaries, listening to your intuition, living from clarity, not chaos. We talk about history, not as trivia, but as a mirror, a way to understand the timeless patterns we still carry in modern life, whether in relationships, work, or our inner world. We blend psychology and philosophy. We learn from Carl Jung and Sufi poets, from ancient rituals and neuroscience, because wisdom comes from many directions, and we need all of it to truly wake up. So if you felt something today, a shift, a question, a small opening, I invite you to stay with it and to subscribe, not just to this channel, but to this way of living, a slower, wiser, more grounded way, because we are not here to chase a perfect life. We are here to become more whole, to feel more alive, to find beauty in the ordinary, meaning in the mystery, and freedom in the places we once felt stuck. And we do that together. This is a space for you, for your questions, your growth, your transformation. And if that resonates with you, I hope you will subscribe. Not because you have to, but because maybe, just maybe, this is one of those moments where life is gently opening a door. You do not have to force it. Just step through. We will meet you there.